Right, today another bit of the UFO story. I didn't actually ask, but it came up quite a few times due to the transmission of the information. I think I asked a question about where the information goes, and this is what it said. Now if you are coming into this straight into communications, if I was you, I'd look at the introductory videos first. This is how a mothership UFO, or now IFO because I know what it is, transmits the information it's gleaned from its exploration of this solar system or any other solar system, how it gets the information back. Now, when they launched these motherships, they assumed that they would probably never see them again, due to planets don't last forever, solar systems don't last forever. So if it had got away from all the other destruction which it's programmed to do, to head away from any trouble, because believe me, there's plenty of solar systems out there it can go to if there's other trouble elsewhere. So they make it completely its own boss, so if anything does happen to the originating planet, it can still feed information to other people who want it. So you can assume that the planet that produced our mothership couldn't tell you whether it still exists or not, but the mothership's been out there for millions of years basically. So it's completely its own boss. So it has to be allowed to, when it gets its information, it doesn't rely on anything meeting up with it ever. So what it does, all the information it's got, if it's not on the central computer, it will transmit the whole lot. And this could take 1,000 years. On its way to its next solar system, or the next place it's picked to go to, remember, it has to accelerate towards a point where another light source is going to end up, which is why they do tend to follow stars out of the Big Bang. So if the star, for instance here, is now clever enough to produce a mothership, the mothership will carry on, will be accelerating away. That way the distance is always shortening. So anyway, so when it gets to here, comes into a solar system, distributes its probes, which we've already talked about in a different video, one to each planet. If it's a big planet, sometimes two. If it's a very detailed planet like ours, could be a lot more. In fact, people have seen a cigar-shaped object turn up and lots of other little things go into it or come out of it. Now that's, it's either picking up or dropping off. Sometimes I'm not sure, I didn't quite get it clear as if the mothership sits out in space. I suspect they're all different anyway, because there's quite a few of these around. By that I mean thousands, you know, and some have gone rogue, which I'll tell you about in another video. But anyway, so yeah, picks up all the probes, and on its way, then it sits there while it calculates its path to the next planet. It has to, basically, it won't have enough power to get there, so it coasts. Everything switches off. As soon as it comes to within a nice bit of light, which will charge up the solar panels and then carry on the process, that's what happens. It all opens up again and then goes to the next solar system. But while it's got power, it will transmit all the knowledge it's gained from its last destination to everybody, anyone who wants it. And how it does this, I mean, this is quite amazing, because we're used to radio signals where you talk and it appears 100 yards away or 10 miles away or whatever on someone else's radio in instant time. Well, obviously in space that doesn't happen. So I'm pretty sure, I'm 90% sure that they don't transmit a radio signal. It's in fact a stream of particles, be they neutrinos, which I think have arrived at planets faster than light. So think of it as a fast particle, and they're fired from an accelerator tube, basically. Now, the back end of the mothership, which I'll draw, this is the back end. Don't know whether it's round or square or what. Power. We'll have lots of accelerator tubes facing lots of different directions. A lot facing backwards. And it will transmits in binary, so that it's like Morse code, 0 and a 1. Obviously not Morse code, but digital, 0 and 1, which we can do now here, but it's not a secret, that. And it might transmit a stream of particles which spread out obviously over time. So if it starts off as a laser, eventually a couple of billion miles away, might be 3 miles across, but at least, and it'll be spreading out too. So generally radio signals will be white noise by the time they got so far away, but a stream of particles transmitted for, say, let's just say a week. I couldn't tell you how long time, because there was nothing you could relate on Earth to the time. It didn't, you know, although it knew our time, it couldn't say to me there was a week. It transmits for a week. You know, it could be 3 weeks. Line of particles for 3 weeks. For a 0, might be 1.5 weeks. So the person at the other end might pick up a few little particles from that burst. Although there was absolutely trillions of particles in the burst, they might only get 1 or 2. But then there'll be a huge gap of a few weeks, and then the 1.5 week one will turn up for a 0. So the whole thing could take 1,000 years. So SETI and people like that don't stand a chance, because it still looks like white noise. They don't stand a chance. They've got to be looking for 1,000 years, maybe even to get a 0. But all the other planets on the know-it-all system, the ones that have been allowed onto the planets that are all in communication with each other, they're given a universal language basically, and you can either learn that or put it on your mothership so it can learn from all the other motherships in the area. So yeah, it'll send it out, and planets and other motherships can pick it up. They put it on their computer and may even transmit it on. So the direction it came from, they will transmit that on. So it's always being renewed. So therefore, eventually, you know, by eventually I mean millions of years, it will get all over the solar system. And remember, you're talking about a big bang in the middle, and lots of things all coming outwards, and some planets don't run into, some forming stars that form planets around them don't come into any trouble at all. So they're the ones that have developed faster. We've had quite a few drawbacks, not only with the well, we don't know before the Earth, but we know that we've had quite a few mass extinctions and things caused by various things. So, but there is, later on, there's a solution for that as well. So that should be, which quite a few stars have done, quite a few planets with dying stars have done. It's almost like a lifeboat, but I'm calling it a life star. But you'll see that later on. That's I don't know when that's coming up. I haven't had a look at the list. So yeah, there's the communications. So communicate now. Long time ago, when I was a kid and was interested in all this stuff, a UFO was seen by a chap who walked up to it like I did. Can't remember whether he said there was any doors on it, but he said there was a grating on the side of a lot of little holes. It was like a square, like that ish, symmetrical squares, and he said that he was sort of near it and suddenly a load of air gushed out of it and he was burnt with lots of little round red patches matching the same pattern. Now a big burst of watching the CCTV. Thought I heard something. The wind's still bad here. Yeah, if that was the transmitter transmitting back to a mothership from this probe, those particles would have burnt him. If he'd got in the way of them, they would have burnt him. Almost like leaving an X-ray machine on for too long. You know, and so he had these marks. He went to the doctor and they said, no idea what that is. Looks like some sort of burn. But he was saying that these holes he was looking at for 1 second, suddenly a burst of what seemed like air came out of them, and he was burnt with all these red marks. So I'm saying that that was probably a particle transmitter transmitting to the mothership, which would have either been in the atmosphere or out in space somewhere. So that's one thing that made me think, because there's a bit of a great, I was 99% sure the probe was talking about transmitting particles and not radio signals over long periods of time, and it would time the important stuff, because a lot of it, remember, because although this mothership, I did ask the question, have you been here before, and it never had, because remember they're going out in a straight line, so no chance of them ever meeting up with us again, because they're gone. Or they might zigzag, you know, if they see a solar system over there, it's going to be here in the time they get there, they'll aim for that point. So it's not exactly a straight line. So anyway, yeah, so basically that that's what it said about communications. Let's look at the time. 13 minutes. Yeah, so anyway, all these tubes transmit that way, obviously all round, this way and that way, and the back ones that way, back to where the mothership came from as it's going to the next. So that's what it'll be doing. It'll be sorting the information, deciding what's most important, sending that, and getting to the less important stuff, and it might then think, right, battery power, not brilliant, I'm going to shut down. So it shuts down, ready for the next solar system. So it will be travelling in its space with, literally, you see Star Wars and that, travelling with all the lights on and people walking about. No, it's not like that, I'm afraid. And there's no, generally on these, there shouldn't be any beings either. Because they wouldn't last, there's no oxygen, nothing like that. nothing that can support life, except if it wakes up and suddenly needs a being to infiltrate a planet or whatever, then it will produce in the production, which I've already done the Mothership, so go back to that if you want to see the DNA production unit, and that will produce what, I mean, generally here we've got the alien grey, haven't we? So if they've ever produced one, I probably reckon that's what it is, and they're expendable. You can either leave it on the planet or take it back with you. You know, they're a single-use unit really. They never last long enough to reach the next planet. So anyway, to give you some idea of speed, when I was talking to the probe, very questions that it didn't really know, there would be a big gap, almost like loading on our computer, and it would be asking the Mothership the question. So obviously on the probe, although the computer's many times more powerful than anything we've got on Earth, that still has to ask the big computer. Now that is colossal. So that's another transmission we've got to have, and I had no evidence on the day whether that was particles or not. But going back to this this chap, in the bit I was in, which was just a square hole, there was no, with a cone on the top that turned to shut the doors. So you can imagine a hole straight through, and on the door here, on the cone at the top, a door there and a door there, it turns to meet, so you've just got a tunnel straight away through. The top of that was the transmitter. As far as I know, I'm pretty sure that on the diagram, because it was showing me diagrams all the time, and I've got no idea, I didn't understand what I was seeing. I could probably draw them, but I didn't understand, but I sort of got the 50% feeling that the transmitter, the aerials, were on top, which, you know, I would have said that was the best place to put them. All round the edge would be another good place. But anyway, so yeah, communications between the probes, and obviously it's going to say, tell the probes, come on, finish now, we're off. And all the probes will then meet, and it'll either come and get them or they'll go out to them. If they go out to them, the probes have to accelerate in the atmosphere because they run on gravity, or rather they cancel the gravitational field around them. So it's just like they're sitting in space really. So if it's sitting looking at you on the ground, it may as well just be in space, because the field it creates cancels the gravity and cancels everything else as well. And so yeah, so that would sit there and then go in order to accelerate it. They never accelerate, well, they do accelerate upwards, but they have to move the discs to do that, and because the discs are spinning at such high speed, it's like a gyroscope. So, and it's not attached to anything, so it'll just move in a very high speed. Go up to the Mothership, go back on the Mothership, transmit all its knowledge to the computer, and then run the discs down. And the discs are run down producing electricity for the Mothership too. There's another form of getting the power back. A bit like our electric cars, when they go downhill they're charging the battery. A bit like that. So yeah, there's that. So that's about it really. That's the communication thing's quite easy, but there'll be a lot of acceleration tubes, a big source of particles, which could be anything. I don't know, I really don't know. I need somebody to talk to me about a physicist or something, to say, you know, if I talk long enough to them, they might understand what I'm, because I mean I've got no idea really. But yeah, so that's that. So as it's travelling to the next star, it'll transmit everything sideways and backwards. sideways, because if you imagine the Big Bang here, planets became able to produce motherships there, motherships took off, always accelerating away from each other. The gap is bigger, which is why we don't get some of the bigger spaceships here anymore, i.e. the ones that use the pyramids, etc. And Stonehenge. Stonehenge was just a base to land a spaceship on while you did maintenance. That's all it was. And because it had a spaceship on it, and very primitive people saw that, obviously that they were probably used to build it in the first place. But a mothership, if it comes in knowing it's going to have to land, I'm not talking about mine, because mine never landed. I'm talking about other types of mothership. They would produce using their production unit, which again is on the mothership section of this, to produce the machinery to utilise the stone or whatever on this planet to build the platform to land the thing on. So to hover in space, they drop the mechanical units, do the basically get the and remember, it's not going to leave them here, because resources in space for that long period of time are quite scarce. So it would take that back and either dismantle it back into its raw components or store it for the next mission, depending on how big it was. The production unit on our mothership was basically a huge 3D printer, but not using styluses, it was using like a matrix of accelerator coils, very small accelerator coils, which could actually place one atom at a time if necessary. So everything was built level up, like our 3D printers today, but a lot of things happening at once, and the whole matrix is jigging about to get, and there's I'm not sure what they were. I think they were wire spools, but I want to go do a special video on the production unit, because that's quite an amazing thing. And also we've got to 22. So yeah, that's all for communications really. Obviously that would communicate another mothership which would be nearby. Occasionally I got the idea that they knew roughly where some of the others were from the transmissions in their direction, and they could sort of by inertia and things like that, they could basically work out how far they had got. But everything is travelling away from everything else at the moment. But like I say, some of the bigger motherships and things used to visit us, but now don't, because there's just the distance is too great. Occasionally, I'll have to go into a different subject about this. I was basically saying that not absolutely everything is going out in a straight line. If something hits something else, it's sort of travelling in different directions, so there is that too. But and I asked the question about triangular UFOs. Where do they come from? And that was one of the things that they've started appearing on Earth recently, and they have come in to our range, if you like, although it's still billions of light years. They've come into our range, so we will see those more often. And all they are is a triangular spaceship with 3 anti-gravity units as balls. And the reason why they produce light, I'm going off on a different track here, I've got some time. The reason why they produce light is because when they power up for the anti-gravity, or to start cancelling the gravity waves, the light they change colour sometimes. Some people have observed them changing colour, and that's basically just because of the frequency of the light, blues, greens, reds, whatever, is changed by the heavy gravitational field, or anti-gravitational field, shall I say. But how the probe works is on the probe page, on the probe video. Now, one other thing while I'm here, version 01 you see at the end of every video name is because I'm sitting here with a board drawing. I'm hoping that one day somebody will say, right, let's do this properly, and we'll get proper diagrams, proper PowerPoint and all that, get a proper studio and do a proper video. That's if anyone ever wants to. We could probably do it here, but we just don't have the time basically. But I don't, because I'm now not so busy here. I will help and do the talking if necessary, because I don't bother with any notes or anything. I just sit down and start talking. I think through my head before, and something, you know, for instance this I've written down here, communication, and that's all. So I couldn't think of anything. It's much better, I find it much better if I just start talking. So anyway, so that's it for communications. I'm not sure what the next subject is, so I'm going to have a look on the, I've got them on the computer, and some of them are chapters in the book, but others are basically, and then there'll be chapters in the book which I'm not going to bother with. I can incorporate them into other things. So that's it. Yep, thank you very much. Thanks for looking, and remember, this is only version 1. So what we'll do a transcript of this one, so I don't forget anything, and add a lot of details and any ideas that other people have got. So use the Project X website or one of the emails to, if you feel strongly, to say what you think. We don't want any religious people saying, no, sorry, we were all produced by a God, there isn't anybody else, because that is absolute rubbish. I'll tell you now, I've seen it. Thank you very much.